You're listening to Mornings on News Talk 1057 KQMS.
Good morning. KQMS News Time, 24 minutes before 9 o'clock. I'm Steve Gibson.
Good morning. I'm Kelly Frost Jr., filling in for Clark today.
Highs today in the low 60s under sunny skies. Overnight tonight, the rain returns, mid-40s. Rain tomorrow, should be mostly sunny Thursday, and then more rain after that. Right now, it's 50 degrees in Redding at 24 minutes before 9. And we have a guest in the studio. Dave Fennell is running for state senate. Good morning, Mr. Fennell.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Is it Fennell or Fennell?
Fennell is great.
Fennell,
yes.
okay.
Like the herb.
Like the herb. Herb Fennell is here. No. And so you're, it's just you and Megan Daly running for this office. There are no candidates of any other party.
It's a unique race because across California, we're the only race where there are two Republicans in all of California. So it's unique. There were 6 candidates, Republicans in the race, 4 dropped out.
So what does that mean for the primary?
So what it means for the primary is you have a choice between a Republican or a Republican. And right now, we'll both make it through, but I think we're both trying to see who gets the most votes at this point.
I don't understand why you both make it through. How come it doesn't work like an actual primary?
You know, it's interesting because we passed the open primary a number of years ago, so it's top 2 regardless.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's why.
Because most of the state, you would have 2 Democrats running against each other. It seems like.
That's a wacky situation. So the primary is basically a dry run.
For us, it is. In other districts, like District 4, they actually ran 6 Republicans, 2 Democrats. The Republicans split the vote. And so 2 Democrats actually went forward in a Republican district that voted 60% Republican. So California politics is always a little crazy.
That is wacky. Wow. So this is maybe fortunate for Megan Daly because she's had some medical episodes and she's still recovering. We have yet to schedule an interview with her. Her folks say that they will schedule one when her doctors clear her, but right now she's still at home recovering. But and I'm sure you sympathetic with her.
Oh, I heard about it December 13th is when I first got the news. She put out the press release earlier in January, and we immediately said, wished her the best, fellow Republicans, so hoping to see her back on the campaign trail soon.
So tell us about your background. Where are you from? What have you done? What's your vision?
Sure. So I moved to California when I was 1, when my father was drafted for Vietnam. So longtime Northern California resident. Currently live in Chico, California. Grew up in Half Moon Bay, California. So fishing, farming community. So relate well to farmers and business people. Went to Santa Clara University. Did tech, then went into the music business, moved my businesses here to Chico because the environment is better, I believe, in the North State than it is in a lot of other parts of the state, a big believer in this part. They've redrawn the district. So historically, Redding and Chico have not been in the same district. So it's a totally new political environment.
That does change the flavor of it quite a bit. Yeah.
Well, I'm talking to people up here in Redding. Redding has always been sort of the big player, and it is the second biggest player now because Chico is now the biggest city. And now you add in the sort of double city of Marysville and Yuba City, which is now the 3rd biggest area. So it's a totally different shift in the politics up here.
It goes down as far as south as Yuba
it
City
is.
and Marysville.
And it's a large district.
Yeah.
So I went to all the fairs and festivals in the 14 counties. We're actually the biggest area in terms of counties. We have more counties in our Senate district than any others. You go to L.A., and L.A. County has 20 state senators, and we have 1 for 14 counties. So it's actually twice geographically the size of Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of different interests that you have to look after.
You do, and I think you've got Redding, you've got Chico, you've got Nevada City, and you've got Grass Valley. So you have some significant urban areas, and then about half the area is rural. So you've got to look after both. And I think one problem in Sacramento is I think a lot of people in Sacramento thinks that Northern California ends at Sacramento, and then there's Oregon. So the North State is often forgotten. So I think half the job of the state senator is to fight for the North State, which I think is just their interests are unrepresented.
Well, and also the fact that it's very largely Republican in this part of the state, and it's a totally democratically controlled legislature.
And I was a longtime Republican. I was a college Republican. I was an Eagle Scout, and Ronald Reagan, when you get an Eagle Scout, sends you a letter, which I still have framed. And but yeah, there's only 8 Republicans out of 40 state senators. So you've got to fight even harder because you are in the minority.
It's been a frustrating ordeal for Brian Daly, for sure. He often expresses that. Is it going to be challenging for you? Do you see it as a challenge to step in and run against Brian Daly's wife? And that it's unfortunate that name recognition is significant in elections. Do you see that as?
I think it's mixed because I think there's the area has been redrawn. So in Chico, we do not have Butte. The southern part of the district does not have the Dolly name recognition. I've spent a lot of time in Lassen. I've made 10 trips to all 14 counties. I've put 25,000 miles on my car, and done 60 events. And even in Lassen County, Brian was was a supervisor in the county. And so he's been in politics for 25 years. So there is sort of, quote, the Dolly dynasty. But I think there's also a sense that maybe there's time for some new blood. I'm 55, which if you compare to a lot of our politicians is kind of young these days.
Yeah,
so,
sure. Especially at the top. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now Megan has significantly less political experience than Brian.
Correct, yeah.
Are you going to capitalize on that?
Well, I think one of our big differences is that, I have a business background. I am coming from the private sector. I have a master's degree. I have a business degree. So, I think one of our big differences is business experience versus sort of just mostly she's been a stay-at-home mom, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think you really need practical solutions in Sacramento. So I think my business education and experience is really going to distinguish us.
Well, and I'm sure she'll cite her business experience in running their seed farm business.
Sure.
Now, did you say what you do for a living?
So I've done tech for a long time. So my first job was selling Next Computers, which was Steve Jobs' group. So I actually got to meet and interact with Steve Jobs, which was very educational and scary at the same time. So did tech for years, and now I'm doing tech and music projects. My family also runs a rock and gravel ornamental rock business. So entrepreneur. I've got my hands in a lot of pots. But I think the North State, what you're seeing up here is they're sort of saying what's called is the silver tsunami, where baby boomers are retiring. They're selling off businesses. You have a lot of retirees up here, but you have a lot of young people. I went to the Reading waterfront plan, and they're saying, well, how do we attract better young people, better doctors? So I think there's this demographic shift. And being a Gen X, I think it's sort of time for Gen X to sort of step in to what have been sort of political baby boomer roles.
And take more leadership roles.
Yeah, I think it's time, yeah.
So what are some of the issues in our newly formed district that you would address if you were elected?
I think some of the biggest issues are, I was an Eagle Scout. When we look at the fires that have been happening up here, I worked at a scout camp for 6 years. I got my first merit badge in the district, but was at 2 scout camps. One of them burned down. And the reason it burned down was that they were not maintaining the fire roads because they got rid of logging. And in many ways, logging was the first defense for firefighting. And that's actually how the scout camp made its money. I think if you're in Sacramento and other parts of the state, you don't think in terms of the forests we have up here. I think also water storage. I went to all the sites reservoir meetings. It's been a long time since we've had real water storage up here, which I think is a big issue. But I think two of the biggest things is I think this is a growing part of the state. And I think economic development and attracting businesses. I mean, the tourism up here, I think the potential is untapped. I was just dislocated my finger, up at Mount Shasta's ski resort there. I'm always up on the mountain. Tahoe gets all the attention, but I think in some ways we're the untapped and more beautiful part of the state.
You really look like a real outdoorsman with your bent pinky there.
What did Ken Murray call it? Superior California?
In the heart of Superior, California. Yes, it's a hub of outdoor recreation for sure, in every direction. I mean, Redding is for sure. Now, water. You touched on water a bit.
Sure.
People don't think about water as much when in water-rich years, but everybody remembers the pain of the drought, and a drought likely will return again. What do we do about water and water storage? Is that the key? Sites Reservoir? Should Shasta Dam be raised? What do you think of these issues?
I think one thing is when I've gone around to the different reservoirs is that we often have been releasing water that we shouldn't be releasing. And we're not even enforcing, some of the reasons that these reservoirs were built were for the purpose of water storage. Mm-hmm. And no one is sort of addressing with the bureaucrats, the building of new reservoirs, but also the not releasing unnecessarily of water, basically into the ocean. We have a Mediterranean climate. So some years we are, dry for many years, then we get 2 big years of rain. It's important that we store when we have rain and snowpack, and we just haven't been doing it. I think one good thing in California is we have term limits. So a lot of the people that have been making these bad decisions for the North State are being termed out. So there's kind of a new, younger generation. There's a huge turnover that's happening in Sacramento right now.
Does term limits make it more difficult for lobbyists to have politicians in their pocket?
I think it does, and I think one interesting distinction, because there are only 2 of us in the race between myself and Megan, is because she served in the Assembly, she can only serve 4 more years due to term limits. So I could...
Really?
Because she served a partial term of Brian's. So if she gets elected
I didn't know they added the Assembly and the Senate
together.
Terms
12 years.
Wow.
So the difference, I think, is it's an open seat because Brian is termed out. Mm-hmm. But if I get in, I could serve 3 terms, which would be 12 years. If Megan gets in, she could serve 1 term, which would be 4. So I think one thing that I could say is, and being 55, I could really spend the next decade transforming and helping this part of the state. But I think at some point, people do get complacent, and I think term limits are good. So getting you out after 12 years and returning to the private sector, I think it's healthy.
Is this your first adventure in politics?
So I ran for lieutenant governor last race. You might have seen me on the ballot. I actually won the North States. There were 7 candidates, got 1 million votes, won the North. So
could have been you and Brian.
We were on many stages together and got to know each other well. But yeah, I that was my first the lieutenant governor run. But I realized I was good at it. I connected well with the people. I enjoy going to the fairs. I enjoy hearing people's problems. And to me, the government, being a business guy, should almost be like the customer service rep for the government, the state senators' offices. But I often, as a business person, I'd call my congressman or senator or assemblyman's office, and they would say, well, that's not my job. We don't do that. And I don't see that. I see it as fight for everyone, help the North State, and be kind of the face and the promotion for the region.
So you would see yourself as more a defender and representative of your constituents than of ideas and social issues?
I really think it's the North State that needs to be fought for. I feel unrepresented in the North State, and I think that's what people feel. And I think there's a lot of issues like fire and water, which Democrats and Republicans, I think with the right leadership, you could reach out to the other side and say, look, how does the forest burning to the ground that then causes erosion, how does that help the environment?
Yeah, it affects everyone,
Real tangible
Right.
issues that need to be dealt with rationality and not with emotion.
Practical.
Too many politicians revert to emotional issues that are really beyond their scope anyway.
And I think a lot of the people who get elected in Sacramento, they're recruited by the party didn't really want the job. Not that they don't like getting the paycheck, but then they just vote yes when they're told to vote yes and no when they vote no. So I find there's just a few politicians on both sides that are kind of running the show. And I think what we need is someone who steps in and just fights for what we need up here in the North.
And what are we missing that you could get as a state senator? What are we missing that they're getting in the in L.A. and down there? I mean, is it the water?
I think it's water. But I think a lot of it is just promoting business and ideas that don't work. A lot of the rules that they make, if you're in San Francisco, you come up with ideas that are crazy for farmers. You just don't understand the idea of a forest fire, the idea of, even talking to veterans, they're giving all this aid when I was out in Plumas County to veterans for homes. They're like, we have homes. What we need is transportation to Reno. So can we take that money and use it for that? Because you've set all this money aside, but it's not what we need it for. So I think a lot of times, if you've got L.A. and San Francisco, who's all concerned about traffic and other, inner city issues, they just don't even think about our part of the state. So I think it's just sort of fighting. I grew up in Half Moon Bay, which was a fishing farming community, and on the other side of the hill was Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley would make bad rules for our side of the hill and the farmers and the fishermen. So I think you need someone to fight for what our region needs. And I think economic development, business, I think that's a lot of it.
There is one issue, an issue that could be seen as an urban issue that's certainly getting worse and worse in Redding and Chico as well, and that's homelessness. Too many people wandering around the streets without shelter. What can be done for them?
Yeah, I think it's hard because one thing I have seen is that when you, as a business person, I put a lot of money into a business, and then there would be a change in the homelessness policy that would allow people to camp in front of my doorstep. And then suddenly I couldn't attract female employees or female customers because at night it got too dangerous.
The courts were flip-flopping on that for a long time.
Yeah, and I think the reality is there's sort of a tough love thing going on. A lot of the homeless, I used to know in my community, the local homeless. Then we started giving more services and we actually imported homeless. And a lot of this has to do with, drug use, mental health issues. But I think it has to be a combination of carrot and, everyone wants to see everyone do well, but at the same time, you have to preserve your downtown. In Chico, where I am, Chico State, the enrollment in Chico State went down. Downtown, especially during COVID, started looking terrible, and people didn't want to send their daughters to Chico State because the downtown was looking dangerous. So
wasn't that whole party school thing then, huh?
The party school, it's still a very social school. It's still a very fun town, I would say.
What are some other issues on your agenda? Besides, you hit fires briefly.
Sure.
Should there be more forest thinning? How would you go about that?
Yeah, I would say forest thinning. I think up in the north, I think bringing back some of the logging practices. Cutting out some of the dead trees that we've got. I think there has been this environmental push historically, and again, I think it's a bit generational where let's don't touch the forests at all. And that has actually made things worse because you just have all this sort of kindling on the ground. So I think you need to manage the forest. And it's complicated because one thing that happens, firefighters have been telling me when they do have fires, they've had it so that fire trucks in Oregon are ready to come help fight fires in Siskiyou County, just north of here, and they're being stopped at the border because their vehicles don't meet California emission standards.
Really?
So they're going to wait to import.
Never heard of that.
This is a story I got from the firefighters that they had some vehicles they wanted to bring in, but they could not bring them in because it did not meet the standards, so they were bringing in extra trucks from New Mexico.
That's crazy.
Which was just letting it burn. And so I've heard a lot of...
meanwhile, all this CO2 going into the atmosphere from the burning forest.
Right, they're far more than these trucks would have done. So I think a lot of it's just not practical solutions, yeah.
Now, you said you have a tech background. What would you bring tech-wise, what are some of the issues as we wrap up that our district faces, or just the state in general?
Well, I think what
Kelly's also our IT guy, by the way.
Okay,
Full
cool.
disclosure there.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so I came from a long Silicon Valley family. My father was at Xerox PARC. I don't know if you know it, but that's where they invented the mouse. So I used to spend summers there. So
cool.
Come from a long tech background. Did tech for years. The thing I'm actually doing in Chico now is we are now doing media projects, and we've been doing them in Oakland, but now we're expanding into Chico. I think music and media up here is actually becoming quite big because it's becoming so expensive in the Bay Area that people are now relocating their businesses. Grass Valley is also under district, going out to Placer. People are now looking up north here because they're like, I can commute, I can set up business here. People are setting up businesses out in the airport, empty buildings up here. So I think there's a lot of opportunities now that people have gotten into the idea of sort of telecommuting. Quality of life up here, I think can't be beat in terms of the recreation, in terms of cost of living. So you see tech companies starting to come up here. But I think one problem is the local communities, because it's a new thing and an older generation, don't even know what to do with these new people coming into town. But I think also a lot of young people want to stay in this area, come back to their roots, but there are no jobs. So getting some of those companies up there, half of it is just working with the local communities and setting things up for businesses. There were some incentives I was supposed to get when I moved my business. The local communities didn't know how to get those government incentives. So I think championing that kind of new development here.
Where can voters find out more about you?
Sure. You can go online at fennellforsenate.com. Fennell's 2 N's and 2 L's in Fennell. So it's great to be here.
And is that the number 4?
Oh, FOR. Thank you.
Okay.
FENNELL, FOR, Senate.com.
Well, thanks a lot for making the drive to talk to us this morning.
Really appreciate it. And don't forget, elections March 5th. Thanks again, Dave Fennell.
Dave Fennell running for the state Senate. That does it for us. This show brought to you by the Coronado Vein Center. A wound in your legs, it won't heal, likely due to a serious venous circulation issue. Call the Coronado Vein Center, 530-24-HEART. News Talk 105.7 KQMS. Take care.
See you tomorrow.
You see the girl with the diamond ring? She knows